finally. Yeah, that was the worst 1 minute. All right, we are going to be in Deuteronomy 13. My goal is to get through chapter 15, and then next week and the week after do 5 chapters each. It's going to be okay. If I got time, we actually might do chapter 26 tonight too. I know. It's going to be fun. Let's go ahead and start ourselves off with a prayer. Father, we humble ourselves before you. We are grateful for the day that you've provided to us, the safety we've enjoyed. Grateful for this opportunity to study your word. Help us to dive into this retelling of your law with the modifications for going into their lands of rest. Help us to notice how you speak to your people and how you expect them to be holy. This is our prayer in your Son's name. Amen. All right, last time we finished off in chapter 12, did I think 10, 11, 12. Primary difference going into chapter 12 is that we are starting to talk about specifics to in the land. This is the law being retold. These are instructions that are being given. So in chapter 12, we opened with the place of worship is going to change. So when they wandered in the wilderness, geographically speaking, the place of worship is the middle. They camped around it, it's in the middle. But now you're going to conquer and take over an entire land. Where are you supposed to meet? So they do Shiloh for a while, there's a little bit of Shechem in there for a while. Ultimately, David and Solomon are going to be tasked with building the temple, and that is where they're going to meet until they are taken into Babylonian captivity. So, God is going to establish this. With that, in chapter 12, there were a couple of modifications that have to be made to the law. One of the modifications is about eating meat. When they wandered in the wilderness and they wanted to eat meat, what was the restriction? They have to take it to the tabernacle and kill it there. Part of it then is going to be sacrificed. You take the rest home, you can eat it. Why did God say they had to do that? Yes. They were having the problem that people wanted to appease the gods, not the God, but the other ones. And so they would do it outside the city, and they're just like, oh, was I not just killing for food? No, you were not. So every animal that is to be consumed has to be brought there. There's a little bit of a caveat made for if you hunted an animal, but by and large, the flocks and herds style animals all have to be taken to the tabernacle. That's not going to be practical anymore. They're going to be living way too far. I mean, can you just imagine that you live up by the Euphrates, you got to go all the way down to Shiloh, which is quite some distance, and you have to take enough animals with you that you can kill them there to then have enough to make it worthwhile to bring it all the way back and hope that it doesn't spoil. Like, okay, there's a lot of logistics with that. And it's just not practical. So God modified it. If they want meat now, what do? You just kill it and eat it. The only caveat he gives is about blood. The blood is to be poured out and mixed in with dirt, meaning it comes out and it's gone. You cannot utilize it. Many times it's worded as it has to run out on the ground like water. I've allowed it to seep back in. Okay, that's the majority of chapter 12, especially as it's going to relate to what is upcoming. We had a little bit of a reminder about idolatry at the end of chapter 12. We're going to have some more comments on that into chapter 13. Any thoughts before we get going? Nice. I scared you with how much material I wanted to talk about tonight. Chapter 13 is a fascinating chapter. Chapter 13 is all about what do I do if somebody says, hey, let's go worship this idol. What do I do? So God says, I'm going to tell you what to do. So he opens with the first section with what happens if a person comes and they are a prophet or a dreamer of dreams. And they come in and they give you a sign or a wonder, and it actually comes to pass. This is the worst of scenarios, right? There was a prediction made, And it actually happened. Does that mean God approves or God disapproves of this person? At this point, we do not know. Rule of thumb is, if they say something and it happens, they are from God. That is the rule of thumb with prophecy, right? But if they then say, let us go after other gods, you are not to listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams. The Lord your God is testing you to know whether whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, down in verse 5, shall be put to death because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the way of slavery, and so forth and so on. You shall purge the evil from your midst. Ben comes in. Ben makes a prediction. The Chiefs will not win the Super Bowl. That's his prediction. And it happened. Do we listen to him? Is he a prophet? I don't know yet. But then he starts saying, you know what? We need to bring Baal worship in here. Oh, no, he's not a prophet. God's just testing us. Let's kill him. And he doesn't put a lot of limitations on how they are to be killed. It doesn't say they have to have a full trial. It doesn't say you've got to get together and everybody's going to go and stone him. No, it's literally, this dude seems like he's speaking the word of God, encourages us to go after idols, kill him. You kill him. Not just take him to be killed. I just want to make sure that that's really clear, because God is putting the responsibility for purity on the individual listener. Not on their government, not on their religious leaders, but each individual person who professes to walk after the Lord with all of their heart and their soul. Any comments on that? All right, that one, cool, I'm good with. But what about if they're in my family, or my neighbor, or my friend? Well, God's got an answer for that. If your brother, the son of your mother, the son or daughter or wife, or somebody that you embrace who is as your own soul, entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known. Some of the gods of the peoples who are around you, whether near you or far off from you, from one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him. Nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him. You shall kill him. Your hand shall be first against him to put him to death, afterward the hand of all the people. You shall stone him to death with stones, because he sought to draw you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and all Israel shall hear and fear and never again do any such wickedness as this is among you. Now we're taking it the next notch. Prophet guy, dreamer of dreams, seems to be a stranger. Dude comes to town, speaks some weird stuff, it comes to happen. What do we do with this guy? That's the point number one. Point number two is, no, this is my kid. This is my uncle. This is my family. This is my daughter. This is my good friend. And they start saying, let's go after these other gods. What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to kill him. What if he didn't mean it? What if I can change him? What if I can make him say, he's not going to do it, he's going to stay faithful? That's not here. Under the law, compared to the law of Christ, there is no longer a sacrifice for sins when intentional sin comes in. This is an intentional sin moment. You got nothing. Yeah. No, not really. There's some more apocryphal style stories, but even those no one really believes. So no, it's kind of like Year of Jubilee. There's evidence they did it once and then pretty well never did it again. So, yeah, same idea. Anything else? Now notice this one is a little different. Prophet, dreamer of dreams dude, starts to say we should follow idols, kill him. This one, though, I should not yield to him, listen to him, pity him, spare him, conceal him, but my hand will be first, afterwards everybody else. What does that by necessity mean? I got to tell people. So this is not a license to go over to your brother's house and kill him in his sleep. Oh, he was talking about idolatry. We ain't doing that. You can do that to the stranger who just got into town, and he's spouting off all this stuff that we're all hearing, probably in the middle of the market square. But your close friend, no, we need evidence. So this is where that 2 or 3 witnesses starts coming in. This is where an examination would come in. We're going to see that even more in the next step. But I just want you to see we are increasing the investigation. However, it doesn't excuse you. You can't just say, go by your religious leaders and say, hey, I think he's talking about idolatry, and then try to vanish as if it was an anonymous tip. No, he has the right to know who his accuser is, which is a very American ideal. It's not very common in the ancient world, but it is really common right here. If you're going to come up and you're going to say this person wants us to go away from God, then you need to face them. You need to be the first one to throw the stone. Any thoughts before we go further? Yeah. Yeah. Saying it and then, yep. And people have to approve. If I'm going to be the one to throw the first stone and they all have to follow, by necessity that means they also agree this is evil inside of our midst and needs to be purged. Cool, so let's get that third level in here. What if it's a whole town and all I got is rumor? I heard those people at Bethel are worshiping all this false stuff. Well, what am I supposed to do? Because this chapter is a lot about the I. Not what do you do as a people, but the I. If you hear in one of your cities, which the Lord, in verse 12, it says, that which the Lord your God has given you to dwell, that certain worthless fellows have gone out among you and have drawn away the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which you have not known. So, scenario, I have heard a rumor. I have heard gossip. I have received a report. It is not verified. What am I supposed to do? Oh, I heard this. Well, someone will take care of it. That's not what God says. Then you shall inquire and make search and ask diligently. And behold, if it be true and certain that such an abomination has been done among you, you shall surely put the inhabitants of that city to the sword, devoting it to destruction, all who are in it and its cattle with the edge of the sword. You shall gather all of its spoil into the midst, in the midst of its open square, and burn the city, all of its spoil with fire, as a whole burnt offering to the Lord your God. It shall be a heap forever. It shall not be built again. None of the devoted things shall stick to your hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger and show you mercy and have compassion on you and multiply you as he swore to your fathers. If you obey the voice of the Lord your God, keeping all of his commandments that I am commanding you today, and doing what is right in the sight of the Lord your God. Whose responsibility is it to start the investigation? It's you. Now, it is a plural you in the Hebrew. But plural yous would include the individual, wouldn't it? You all are responsible for ensuring that there is no false teaching at this congregation. So if one of you starts to hear that there's false teaching and does nothing, all have broken. Now we have a new problem. We have a second city that is starting to say, we don't have to keep all of the commands. Once you open that door and you say, you know what, we don't have to do everything, then everything is open. If I don't have to keep that command, I don't have to keep any of the other ones. And then we're going to have 2 cities that are worshiping false gods. So you have to make an investigation. I have heard the rumor. I have to go. I shall do an investigation. I shall inquire and search and ask diligently. And if it's true and certain, I like that too. If it's true and you're certain, then you will put the inhabitants of that city to the sword. That's going to require a lot of people, right? So if I've heard the rumor, I got to go to the city and I got to ask around. And I'm like, dude, they have an Asherah pole in the middle of their market square. It's kind of pretty obvious. So I'm going to have to go and I'm going to have to get enough people that are capable of wielding a sword against these people. And then enough people that we can be away from our farms long enough to provide enough of a war that we can destroy this city and everything that is contained within it. However, people are greedy and manipulative, right? So God says, there could be some among you who say, oh, that one over there, that city, they're the ones that are practicing idolatry. And you got a whole bunch of worthless fellows all around you, and they're like, yeah, we all saw it. And so let's go kill them and take all their stuff. That's not what the command is it? What are they supposed to destroy, and how are they supposed to do it? Everything. Cattle. I didn't even do that on the east side of the Jordan. We didn't even do that. We're supposed to take everything and bring it into the middle and burn everything. I like that the ESV says, none of the devoted things shall stick to your hand. I like that. Oh, it just stuck. It just came with me. It's very Achan, right? When they went to Jericho, they knocked it down. They burned it. But something stuck to the hand. And what happened? God had to punish everybody. Because when the one failed, they all failed. Because this is a plural you. You includes all individuals. Any comments, any thoughts anybody has? Yeah.
You've all seen the schedule that's upcoming in the final quarter of this year. Drew and Clay are going to be teaching on this very topic, is God a moral monster? And develop it at length. So I'm highly recommending what hasn't happened yet.
Pay attention to his words. If he starts saying we need to follow idols, we have to kill him. You're a prophet, right? Sorry. All right, any other thoughts on chapter 13? Yes. The closest you're going to get to this last one is Benjamin gets nearly annihilated in the book of Judges. It's for a different reason, but that is as close, I think, as we have evidence for. But yeah, no, we don't see it. Mostly probably because it's not human nature to do it. I don't want to kill my friend. I don't really want to kill anybody. I mean, how many of those people are existing in Israel? Like, dude, we did all this killing. I'm just tired of it. I don't want to do it. So we have the cycle of the book of Judges, where they go up and they go down and they go up and they go down because I don't want to kill my people. Killing your people would be a lot better than the Moabites doing it, because they're going to kill a whole lot more. No. But Moses is clear, you were warned. Did I see a hand over here a while ago? I saw movement. That's all I knew. Cool. You guys ready for 14? So did you guys read 14? Did you understand why I'm like, I don't understand? Did you catch it? It's in the second half. First half, it's easy enough for me. And then we get back to this second tithe idea. I'm going to save those thoughts for then. So the beginning of chapter 14, we technically have a little bit of a tag on. It's kind of a interjection between the two topics. It's more related to chapter 13, really, than it is to chapter 14. But the first two verses, it says, "You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves or make any kind of baldness on your foreheads for the dead. You are a people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." It was pretty common, it's still kind of common actually, that in this kind of intense grief, I want to show my grief somehow. And so the marring of the body was very common, especially in the ancient world. But we can even see it today. People in intense grief pulling out their beard, yanking out their hair, having sores on them, like it can still occur even today. Not as much because we're on this side of Christ, and so we've got a lot of Christian influences in there. But before that, in the pagan world, this is also a way of honoring the ancestors. So I want to honor them. I have cut my body and bled my life. I want the gods to notice that this person needs their special attention. I have bled myself. It's very Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. We're going to see, well, I don't think we actually get to see it in Deuteronomy. In Leviticus, it also adds in things like tattooing yourself for the dead, or more intentional cutting. This one is more just I sliced, but the idea of ritualized scarring is included in the Leviticus sections, but it's still pretty similar. Any comments? Yeah. I like that. It's very Nadab and Abihu just died. Moses and Aaron are not allowed to weep. Yeah, I like that. Anything else? Okay, let's get into the fun. Verse 3 through verse 21 is all about clean and unclean. I'm not going to go through the full list just because I don't want to read it. But how do I know if it's a clean animal or not a clean animal? There's two criteria. What are the two criteria? Verse 6. Divided hooves, chew the cud. If it does one but not the other, it is unclean. That's your whole premise. How do I know? So yes, that lets you know this is how you eat, this is what you're allowed to eat, this is what you're not allowed to eat, and it goes forth from there. And especially what you're allowed to sacrifice. Eat also is in there. We get instructions on things that are in the water. What are the two criteria that you need in order to eat something out of the water? Scales and fins, which means you can't have a dolphin or an octopus or crabs, lobster, eel. Yeah. What about birds? This is one of the passages that people will go to say, look, the Bible is made up because bats are included. Bats aren't birds. Okay, if that's what you're down to, you go right on. But how do you know if the bird is clean? The easiest answer is it in the list of the things that aren't clean? Because we don't really get great, clear ideas. The primary characteristic that really seems to bind them all together is they're carrion eaters. Vultures, falcons, ravens, that they have this idea of I'm willing to eat the dead stuff, rather than seed eaters or even live animal consumers, like eating bugs, that idea. Also, take the bird list with a grain of salt. We're pretty confident in the mammal list from verse 3 down through verse 8. We're good at the water one, but the bird one, we're not 100% sure which birds are meant by these Hebrew words, because they don't call them the same words later on. So we're pretty sure. Sometimes they've got some similarities in there, but if I read this list out, I can guarantee you there's going to be at least two translations in here that say entirely different words. That's why I'm not going to read it. You figure it out yourself. What about insects? How do I know if I can eat the insect? Can't eat it if it is winged. Not just flies, but wings. All right. What about if something dies naturally? I came out, my cow is dead. It was alive yesterday, now it's dead. What do I do? I love that. Yeah. The bug thing? Yeah. Locusts have wings, but the wings are not on the outside. So we're talking more bees, butterflies, moths, rather than those that can put them in. This is what the Jews say. That is the only answer I know how to give. So maybe. Yes. So, and let's go to Ashley's comment now. If it dies naturally, you can give it to a foreigner, or you can sell it to a foreigner. I love that. I just love it so much. I can just see Moses. He's like, don't do this because it's not holy, it's unclean, but you could go sell it in town. I just love that. Or, oh, there's a sojourner coming through and my cow just died. Well, I'll kill it and you cut it up and eat it and give it to you. Enjoy. I'm full. I'm not going to partake. I just love that. We're going to get a lot in Deuteronomy of the us and them. When we are in there, we are us. We are not them. They are different. We don't hold them to the same standards. Some standards we still do, but some standards we don't. They're not required to behave exactly like us. Some they do, some they don't. This is one of those where, I raised this cow. I got to get something out of it. Here, you buy it. So they get to. Last one is about a young goat. What are we not supposed to boil a young goat in? Its own mother's milk. So this is the idea of, to the Jews, it's actually the idea of incest. We are keeping it separate and pure. So they are of the same, they can't be together. That's the idea. We can't have cheese in Israel with meat because they got to be careful. We don't know where that one came from. Oh, yeah, that's very Jewish. Okay, it's time, guys. There are 3 times in the book of Deuteronomy that we discuss this tithe. The first time is in chapter 12. All we get in chapter 12 is in verse 17, where it just kind of mentions in there, oh, by the way, there's a tithe that you're not supposed to just use for whatever. Like, that's literally it. Like, there's nothing. In chapter 14, we get some more details, and in chapter 26, we get more details. So let's deal with 14 before we add in 26, because I got questions. 26 answers some of them, doesn't answer all of them. So let's make the questions before we look for answers. In verse 22, the ESV says, you shall tithe all the yield of your seed. Does anybody have any difference there? Yes. Okay, keep going. Anybody else? Anybody say tithe of tithes? Because that's what it says in Hebrew. But in English, we never translate it this way. Ever. I found one translation that was from the 1850s, something like that. And it's not a really good one. It's mostly discredited, and it says tithe of tithes. So, it was more literal. The tithe of tithes to the Jews means this is the second of the tithes, not a 10% of 10%. If we read tithe of tithes, we get that idea. That's probably why in English we don't translate it that way, because that's going to cause a lot of confusion. You're going to have a lot of people saying one thing and another thing, and some people are going to look at the Hebrew and others are going to say we should be able to just use the English and it's okay. You can just hear the arguments. But I want you to understand that like Deuteronomy is second law, this is second tithe. It is adding but also same. Because Deuteronomy does modify the law. Because you're going into a land. We got to talk about you're not wandering anymore. So this is a second tithe. Every year, you are to tithe to the Levites. It goes to the temple, goes to the tabernacle, Levites distribute it, it's given to priests. All of that happens. That continues when you go into the land. But now you're going into the land and you're going to be more prosperous than you were before. You're going to have fields. You're going to have herds, the size of which you have not known before. So we're going to add a second tithe. This tithe, we're going to use it a little bit different. Happens every year. It's an annual style tithe. It says in verse 23, before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. What is it used for? It is used in worship of God. When are you supposed to use it? When God says so. That's a good answer. Because he doesn't tell us. He has no direction here. In fact, he's going to broaden this into one of the most broad commands that I have ever seen under the law of Moses. Probably also under the law of Christ, but I'm going to at least say under the law of Moses. Because then he says, if the way is too long for you, in verse 24, so that you are not able to carry the tithe when the Lord your God blesses you, because the place is too far from you, which the Lord your God chooses to set his name there, then you shall turn it into money, bind up the money in your hand, go to the place that the Lord your God chooses, and spend the money for whatever you want. Oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, whatever your appetite craves, you shall eat there before the Lord your God, and rejoice, you and your household, and you shall not neglect the Levite who's within your towns. He has no portion or inheritance with you. We're going to talk more about that when we add in verse 28. Do you get my conundrum? Did anybody pick up on it? Oh, come on, y'all. What are the things you can buy? What are the options that Moses specifically says through the inspiration of the Lord? Beer. Wine. Strong fermented drink. Like, these words are not playing around words. You know, we do that with the Lord's Supper, right? Fruit of the vine is not the same as wine. It's different words. Like, we do that, right? So if we're going to be consistent, these words mean you're going to be drunk. This is the best of the you're going to be drunks. Can you find a time where God says, you need to worship me drunk? Can you think of another time? Yeah, I couldn't either. So I went looking. I looked at all the commentaries I could find, including less reputable ones. I looked at what the Jews wrote about this section, and what I found is nobody wants to talk about it. Oh man, it was frustrating. The Christian authors would get to this and they would clearly say, well, they would go and they would do this before the Lord and they would buy meats or wine or alcohol and then they would go right on. That was it. No comment on the fact that this is the only time I know of in Scripture, besides perhaps in Proverbs where it says, let the old people be drunk if they want to be drunk. That's about it. And that's Proverbs. It's written by Solomon, that section, so grain of salt. It just flabbergasts me. To the Jews, this tithe is to be used primarily 3 times a year. You want to guess what times those are? Passover, Pentecost, Day of Atonement. Okay. These are some of the biggest feast days in Judaism. These are some of the most important days and festivals of the Jewish law. And God says if you live too far, one of the things you're allowed to buy is alcohol to be drunk. It just blows my mind. Because it doesn't There's no limitation here. There's nothing to curb it. And I don't know how I feel about that. That's what I told you last time. Like, I just don't know how I feel about that. Like, it's the only time. We have a lot of prohibitions about not being drunk. I mean, Levites are not supposed to ever get drunk. Priests are not supposed to ever be drunk. But you're coming to worship, and you can buy literally whatever your heart desires. I don't know any other time that God just gives you a blank check. It's just, it astounds me. Yeah.
Josh, I don't see where it requires that they drink so much that they get drunk.
It requires it only under the idea of you can buy anything your heart desires. So if God opens a door and he says nothing is off limits, nothing is off limits. God brought a sheet down before Peter and said, kill and eat. I don't want to. Nothing is off limits. What God has made clean, let no one say is unclean. So if you come in and God says you can buy, the Hebrew means the strongest of alcohols, what does alcohol do?
I guess I would just argue that they also don't have to become gluttons and eat themselves sick.
It's true.
And so I guess I would argue that the kind of things they can buy is not restricted. The amount is not addressed, and other passages would forbid drunkenness.
It's just a weird thing. And I agree that there are laws that could curb it. But it fascinates me that how God is so specific, and Moses is really specific in these next chapters, to have a law that flat out says do whichever you want. Like, it just, I don't know how I feel about it. I just don't. Like, no restrictions at all. It's just fascinating. Fascinating to me. And that's why I told you last week, like, you got to read 14. Like, I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. Yes, to enjoy it. Again, it is a strange thing. You shall eat there before the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household and everybody with you. Levite as well, also, it has to be included. It's just strange. So let's add in the last two verses, and then let's look at chapter 26. At the end of every 3 years, you bring out all of the tithe of your produce in the same year and lay it up within your towns. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance with you, the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow who are within your towns, shall come and eat and be filled, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands that you do. Every 3 years, this special second tithe that I utilize in the praise of God at the festivals, according to Jewish traditions, instead, I give it away. This year, the Levites get it, the sojourners get it, the foreigners get it, the fatherless get it, the widows get it, so that they can eat and be filled. To use the words of before, eat and rejoice, eat and enjoy, so that they can. So this year, I may have to save more than just my tithe, because my tithe is going to go away. I don't get to use it. So I might have to save even more if I want to go to these festivals and actually eat and rejoice. It's just very interesting. I don't know that I have ever heard anybody talk about this ever. Certainly I didn't, so yeah.
I think there's a difference between God telling you, you can do this, but you're going to do it in my presence, versus off to the side where nobody can see.
It could be. I could get on board with that. The other idea is if everybody around you is already doing it, and they're really good at ignoring the fact that they're in the presence of God. I mean, after all, they're in the presence of God at Mount Sinai and they build a calf. So Human nature, we're good at ignoring. But yeah, I could go with that. Yeah. Yes. Which is a nice Christian ideal. Yeah, they're good at ignoring that one too. I don't know. It just makes me stumble. I get to it and it's odd. So let's talk about chapter 26. If we get a chance, we're going to come back to chapter 15. I don't have it on the board because, well, I just wrote 14, then 15, and then I was like, you know what, 26 is probably more helpful here. So 26 specifically is talking about what do I do with first fruits things and tithes. And the tithes is not the major one that I give for the Levites and the priests to utilize and for the functioning of the temple. So it says in chapter 26, verse 1, when you come into the land the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, and you take possession of it, you live in it, you shall take some of the first of all of the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from your land that the Lord your God is giving you. You put it into a basket, and you go to the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name to dwell there. Now, specifically, we can utilize that to say Pentecost. It is literally the festival of first fruits. So, we can say this is a festival of first fruits event. It's allowed. You go to the priest who is in office at that time, and you say specific words. I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers. The priest takes it from the basket, sets it down before the altar. We now have more words that are ritualized. A wandering Aramaean was my father. He went down into Egypt. He sojourned there. We were few in numbers. So we're telling the story of what we've come through. You can read down a little bit more on your own, but I want to get back to the stuff that we're talking about right now. So in verse 10 it says, and now, behold, now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. And you shall set it before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God. You shall rejoice in all the good that the Lord your God has given to you and to your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you. When you have finished paying all the tithe of your produce in the third year, the year of tithing given to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat within your towns and be filled, then you shall say before the Lord your God, I have removed the sacred portion out of my house, and moreover I have given it to the Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all that you have commanded me. I have not transgressed in any of your commandments. I have not forgotten them. I have not eaten of the tithe while I was mourning, or removed any of it while I was unclean, or offered any of it to the dead. I have obeyed the voice of the Lord my God. I have done according to all that you've commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the ground that you have given us, as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then we have the same, do what God says. So does this clarify anything for anybody? Not really. It's just interesting. All of the specificities that we get, but the first fruits and this tithe are so ambiguous. It's almost as though God wants them to come in and see how prosperous that they can give up 20% for these things and it's not even going to touch them. It's so awesome. And I love the ritualized, I have come into the land. Do they do this only the first year? Doesn't seem like it. Every year at First Fruits, I come in and I say, my lines. I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Rituals. We're reminding ourselves. It's just very interesting. Any thoughts anybody has on 26? Like I said, I tried looking in commentaries, and most of them just ignore it. If they don't ignore it, they're unhelpful. So I'm just going to, evidently that means that most of humanity for the last 2,000 years also doesn't know what to think about this. Even the Jews today are confused about it, which is also fascinating to me. Any comments? Yeah. Blow off steam? That's as good an explanation as anything I read. Yeah. Cool. All right, chapter 15. One of the least desired of all of the laws in the law of Moses begins in chapter 15, followed pretty closely by a year of Jubilee, because those are the things that nobody ever argues that we should still be doing. You might get people today that would say we need to still keep the Sabbath, seventh day. Some people still will say things like, well, don't be a homosexual because the law of Moses says not to. Or they'll say we should follow the Ten Commandments. Those are good. I have yet to meet someone in modern day that says we need to practice the every 7 years release of all debts. I don't really know anybody. It involves a lot of money. So in the first six verses, we're introduced to this idea. Every 7 years, you grant a release. The beginning discussion is release from debts, but it's specific debts. It is Jew to Jew lending. Now, already they're not allowed to charge interest. We know that. So I lent money to Wayne, and he's been paying it back to me for a few years. He's still got more to pay, but it's a year 7. It's forgiven. You owe nothing now. Think about that when Jesus is telling his parables. And one of the parables is about a guy who owes money to another guy. And nowhere in there does a Jew say, why don't they just wait a few more years? It's going to be sabbatical year. Nobody makes that argument. Because we kind of ignore that one, right? We don't really like that one. And yet, when we look at how much time Moses is going to spend discussing this, he spends an entire chapter discussing what do you do on this 7-year thing. And it's ambiguous about tithing. In fact, even I think it's at the end of Leviticus, the tithe is the one that goes to the priests and the Levites is nothing. It says, make your animals go between a narrow area, put your rod over it. 10th one, pull it out. Like that is just nothing in the eyes of God. And yet they make a huge deal about that in the New Testament. They argue with Jesus about it. He throws it in their face. Not one of them says, well, why don't they just wait till the Sabbath year and then it'll all go away? So if I lend to a brother and it's the 7th year, I let it go. Of a foreigner, I keep it. Us and them. I can lend to a foreigner, I can charge him interest. I can lend to a foreigner and I can hold him accountable for as long as we are alive. And if he dies, I can hold his family accountable. I can do all of that. With my brethren, I cannot. Now, he does have a little caveat here. Let's see. So down in... No, we're going to talk about it in the next section, so we'll save it here for just a second. In verse 4, it says that there will be no poor among you. This is an easy way to distribute wealth. I have money, you need money, I give you enough money that you can survive. You've been paying me back, which means you're prospering. Gets to the 7th year, I'm still fine. I don't have all of my money back, but I am still prospering too, which means we are both prospering. It means I don't need your money. I don't need my money, so I can give to you the next time. I can give it to you. I can give it to you. I can just give it away because God's going to prosper me enough that I don't have to worry about it. That takes a lot of faith. A lot of faith. All right, any questions or comments on the first 6 verses? Oh. We're out of time. I knew chapter 14 was going to derail me. So we're going to continue chapter 15, picking up with probably around verse 7, but I'll probably do a review. I'm going to try to do a lot of it next time, so read like 5 chapters. Good luck to me as well. Thanks.